The place was in lockdown and the Bishu security forces were roaming the streets. But I was with a photographer from Agence France Presse and a journalist from the Melbourne Age and myself. And we decided to bluff our way in, and we drove up to the first roadblock and said, "No, we're not journalists. We've come to gamble at the Amatola Sun." And the cop went, "Oh, okay," and let us in. Now we were in Bishu where no other journalists were. So when the ANC march arrived from King Williamstown, we were at the front of it, and I walked past a whole lot of Cisco Defence Force soldiers dug in with R4 rifles on a slope, and they were staggered, so they were shooting over each other, but they were all in battle positions, and I could see they were as petrified as hell. And I also knew by reputation they were very, very poorly trained. But I made a note of the fact that they had R4 rifles, and I thought, oh yeah, I know the R4 rifle. I was trained on the R4 rifle when I was in the army. I've been in many situations where 100, 200 of them are fired at the same time. I know what that noise sounds like on the shooting range. How many times I've been on a shooting range firing that weapon. And that's what saved my life, because when the marchers arrived and they were walking up a hill and then into the Bishu Stadium, I was recording a police helicopter because Canadian Broadcasting Corporation had asked me to do some reporting on this march for them, and they loved ambient sound. And it was a trick we used to do in the townships where we would narrate what we saw, we'd commentate on what we saw. It just gave it a rather dramatic feel, and it's called theatre of the mind. You could take your listeners there because they could hear as you explained what was going on, and the breathlessness of it, and all the sounds were all captured by your recording. So that was something I was quite used to doing. And anyway, I was recording this police helicopter, and suddenly I heard that noise of R4 rifles, but it was coming from in front of me where the stadium was, and I didn't realize that there were a whole lot of Cisco Defence Force soldiers there. But in an instant, I knew if they're shooting, the guys now right behind me, up on the hill, about 20 meters away, they're going to start shooting as well. So I dropped, and sure enough, they opened up as well. And this barrage of gunfire then raked across us, and all the people around me were shot, but I was flat on my stomach, and so I survived. And that's the only way I got away out of that massacre situation, is because I knew the sound of the R4 rifle. But at that moment, I was not aware of what had just happened. I mean, I realized there were loads of bullets were flying, grabbed my microphone, which was now on, tape recorder on, and I started doing what we always did. I started narrating what I could see. But I was lying down, so I couldn't see what was behind me, and I was bewildered. I was going, but there's all this shooting, but I can see lots of people lying on the ground, but I don't think they're hurt. I think they're just like me, they've just ducked for cover. It seemed unbelievable that people were dying. And when I'm watching, I can still see people are being shot, but I think because you take your cues from movies, you think when a person is shot, they will fly backwards. They will in some way be propelled by the force of the bullet. I can tell you that's not what happens. When people are shot dead, they fall, crumple, because the life stops right then. And I was witnessing this but not realizing what was going on. And people's shoes were lying everywhere, and then it was dust because people were scattering, and this dust ball dust was being kicked up into the air. And it was only as I turned over to have a look at the guy who was next to me, I'd been walking down the hill talking to him, and I saw that the back of his head had been shot off, and there was blood now starting to creep closer to me, and I realized this is horrible what is happening to me. And if you ever hear the recording, you hear how my voice changes completely. So I'm all excited, oh, this is happening, and suddenly I'm going, oh my God, as the awfulness of the situation took hold. But I carried on talking and explaining what was going on, and the whole thing lasted about 11 minutes. But again, I was bulletproof, so when I stood up and the soldiers had withdrawn, and my mates who were much further ahead of me went, are you okay? And I was going, yeah, I've got it all on tape, I've got it all on tape. I'm more excited about the fact that I've got a story rather than the enormity of the tragedy that I've just experienced. Also walking back, I saw a dead soldier, and for a very long time they said it was only ANC protesters who had been killed. there's a soldier has been killed, and only when I gave testimony at one of the inquiries, I spoke about that soldier, and now they've added the soldier to the list. I felt it was important that the soldier also died in that. He got shot in the back of the head by one of his mates. That's what had happened to him. I was then, the other story I did was the Chris Hani massacre, the Chris Hani assassination. And that was a bizarre incident. I was sitting at the news desk at 7:02, doing the Saturday morning news, Easter Saturday. I had my feet up, waiting for the 10 o'clock news. It was about 10 to 10. And the phone rang on the desk, not on air, answered the phone, and a woman said, hello, I live over the road from Chris Hani, and he's just been shot. Yeah, oh, has he? Thank you very much. Easter Saturday prank. Well done. You think I went, hold on. So what, just give me the circumstances where do you live? She gave me the address, Dawn Park. Okay, that checks out. So what did you see? She said, well, I'm looking out the window now, and my husband's trying to revive him in the driveway. So I thought, well, this is quite specific stuff. I said to her, just describe what the build-up to that. And she said, well, I heard a couple of gunshots. I looked out the window, and I saw a white man running down the driveway and got into a red car and drove away. And you know what persuaded me that this was not a hoax? Red car. Because she said red car. Because liars don't give that kind of detail. We were used to getting hoaxes on the news desk, and it was the lack of detail that would always give people away. And so red car was the thing. But I was now up till 10 o'clock and I had to go read the news. Now, do I go on air and say Chris Hani's been shot and tip the country into the prospect of a civil war and it's not true? Or do I hold it back for another hour? Now, this was the age of, there was no social media or things like that, so I could hold it back without it being reported widely. I phoned the ANC. Jill Marcus was then the ANC spokesperson, and she was very irritated that I'd phoned her on a Saturday morning, Easter Saturday morning, and she said, oh, we get calls like this all the time, but I'll check it out. I phoned the cops, and the cops said, well, we haven't heard anything. Of course, why would they? The woman's husband was still trying to revive him in the driveway. I was probably the third person who knew, or fourth person who knew that Chris Hani had been shot. So I had to go into the news, that 10 o'clock news, and I said to the DJ on air on 702, oh my God, I'm sitting on one of the biggest stories I've ever had, and I can't say a word about it. I said, but get the breaking news jingle ready, because I'm going to be back. I needed it confirmed. I had sent a reporter out as well. Judith Dubin was her name. Came out of the newsroom, and the phone was ringing, and it was the cop, a guy called Colonel Franz Malherbe. And he said, in answer to your inquiry, a body identified as that of Chris Hani, and I just slammed the phone down, ran back in, and broke that story. And then, so the aftermath started of the assassination of Chris Hani. It actually hit me a lot more personally than it otherwise would, because I developed quite a close relationship with Chris Hani when I was at Capital Radio. He came back to South Africa, and he was sought refuge in Transkei because the security forces were after him, and Bantu Alamisa was then the head of Transkei, and he gave him refuge. He was always an ANC sympathizer and supporter, obviously. And so we had, as a Transkei-based radio station, even though we were in Johannesburg, we had a lot of access to Chris Hani. Even the night of the Bishu massacre, he was there, and I went down, and I've still got a 20-minute conversation that he and I had as we sat and analysed what had happened as a result of the Bishu massacre with Chris Hani. So his assassination hit me a lot harder than others would have, and I, to this day, regret that we don't have somebody of his caliber running this country, because sure as hell, what had happened under Zuma would never have happened under Hani. He was a special human being. So those were my two big stories. I joined 702, had a wonderful career, and then I did things like cover the Olympic Games. Cornell, I remember him being in 2012 at the Olympics. I did the 96 Atlanta Olympics. In fact, I joined 702 to do the 95 World Cup. A hell of an occasion. I was sitting at Weber Wenzel writing a cease and desist letter to stop Chinese traders from manufacturing knock-off Levi jeans, and all I felt like was the world's worst corporate bully. And the phone rang, and it was Chris Gibbons, who was the head of news at 702, and he said, "Are you still interested in that law law? Don't you want to come and join us full-time?" I went, "Yeah, I do." And I resigned that day. I didn't finish my law. I have absolutely no regrets. It wasn't serving a purpose, because as I was doing the law, they started repealing all this legislation that I was then going, fight! And they were making me redundant. So I joined 702, covered the World Cup, covered the Atlanta Olympics, and that's where I saw the biggest, my favorite moment in my career, because it was such an enjoyable moment, was watching Josiah Tugwani win the Olympic marathon. In the closest time in Olympic history, he had Lee Bongju from Korea and Eric Wainana from Kenya right behind him. But here was this little man, and he had told me in the build-up to the Olympics about how he'd been shot in a hijacking attempt. He had the scar on his chin from where the bullet had grazed him, and that had happened 5 months previously, and now there he was, leading the Olympic marathon. And I got to know those guys. We went to the United States with the team early, and we stayed at a little town called LaGrange in Georgia. And so Penny Haynes and Marianne Creel, the hockey team, all the people who went on to shine in the Olympics, there were 12 journalists, and we got to know them very well, and the Olympic marathon team, Bolida Yawa, Gert Thys, Lawrence Pugh, and Josiah Tugwani. And there's a lovely story that goes with that, is that there were 4 of them, but only 3 would run. But Samram Sami's wife nagged him to choose a reserve, just in case one of the other 3 got injured. And Lawrence Pugh was chosen as the reserve. And in the week building up to the Olympic marathon, I interviewed Yawa, and I said to him, "What are you going to do this week?" He said, "Well, I'll just do some light running." And in one of those light runs, he suffered a stress fracture, and he couldn't compete in the Olympics. Lawrence Pugh then took his place. But here's the thing. Lawrence Pugh had been told, "We don't need you, you're extraneous. Why don't you go and compete in Europe? There's some events there, you can earn yourself some money." So he was on his way to Europe. He was in Washington about to catch a flight, and they managed to get hold of him to get him back. The plane that he was booked on was TWA Flight 800, which blew up in the air. It was a terror bomb. So Lawrence Pugh's life was saved by Yawa's injury. So now it was Yawa, Pugh, Gert Thys, and Josiah Tugwani. And they had a tactical surround them with green. Every time a runner went to the front, the 3 of them would pull the guy back. And I sat and watched that happening on TV, got to the Olympic Stadium, and then whoever was strongest would go for it. And Josiah was the strongest, and he won the marathon. What an incredible occasion. And my little boy at the Ridge is doing a project on sporting heroes. And I said, "Dude, there's only one. It's Josiah Tugwani." I'll tell you one quick side story. I'll move on to Rusty now, because I do see time is running over this. So we did all the news conference, sent out all the stories, and I went back to the press box in the Olympic Stadium. The marathon had been run in the morning, 9 o'clock in the morning, because of the incredibly hot, humid weather in Atlanta. And normally what happens is the marathon ends during the closing ceremony in the evening. So now the marathon ended in the morning, and we still had the closing ceremony in the evening. So the stadium was virtually empty when Josiah Tugwani won the race. While I was then finished filing my stories and I was packing up my stuff, the volunteers were now in the stadium preparing it for the closing ceremony. And the great composer John Williams was there with the orchestra, the guy who wrote the theme for Star Wars and Raiders of the Lost Ark and all the most prominent film scores. He was there, and he'd written the Olympic music as well, so he's conducting, I'm getting a free show from the great John Williams, and just kind of watching. And then there was this hubbub going on, and there was one more runner to come in. This is now like 2 hours after the end of the marathon. And when I looked at his number, I could look him up on the records. He was from Afghanistan. And he had, as the story then, after doing the research on him, it turned out, he had trained by dodging snipers' bullets in a war-torn country. When he got to Atlanta, he did his hamstring. Cordell knows all about that at Olympic Games, don't you? Doing a hammy. And he said, no, my country said me to run this race, I'm going to run this race. So he hobbled his way through the race, and he finished it in the slowest time for the Olympic marathon. But when John Williams, as he's conducting, was told, well, we got one more runner, so they played music for him, and they put a temporary finish tape. He got a bigger cheer coming last than Josiah got coming first. And I just love the fact that first and last had these magnificent stories. I've now fast forward through the bulk of my work life. I worked at 702 in various guises. I did the afternoon drive for 11 years. And then I got sick and tired of 702 and the people and the politics and all of that. And I went freelance and worked for a couple of radio stations, Power FM and what was then called Hot 91.9, it's now Hot 102.7. And then Kaya FM phoned me up and offered me a morning show. And that's the holy grail of radio. You want to do the breakfast show, even though it does mean waking up at 4:30 in the morning. But that's the huge audience and it sets the day up. And I worked there for 4 years at the breakfast show. And that, I think, was the best time of my life. I loved that radio so much and the people I worked with. And I was such an oddity because the average Kaya audience member is a 35-year-old black woman. As you can see, I'm none of those. But I had two producers who were 35-year-old black women who understood what the audience would want. I knew how to execute it, so it worked out really well. And like anything in life, after 40 years, I decided I'd had enough. I worked for SABC TV as well, doing all the live sport, Comrades Marathon, Olympic Games as well. And I've done my time. And I got a phone call. I'd done 2 sports trivia books for Penguin Books. Pan Macmillan, as a publishing house, had been nagging me for a while to write something, and they could never find the project that they wanted me to do, and I was very for it, suggesting things to them, but that was always on their radar. And suddenly I got the phone call to say, look, we've been negotiating with Rassie Erasmus for over a year, and he's finally committed himself to doing his memoir. Would you consider writing it? And in the blink of an eye, I said, well, that's actually right up my street. I will do that. When I met Rassie at Frenville Wine Farm in January last year, I said to him, why do you want to do this book? He said the main reason is because people underestimate me, or they misunderstand me, not underestimate, they misunderstand me. They think that I am this very loud, sociable person, but I'm not. I'm very shy, and I was looking at him, no, you're not. You're a party animal, Callum, we all know this. You're a gregarious character. But that was his motivation. He said, I want to tell people about my background, where I come from, and why I do what I do, because I think I'm misunderstood. And I thought, I've never met a man with a inferiority complex. And then we started working, and it all came clear to me what was going on. And he's this dreadfully shy man. He's socially awkward. And being in this environment freaks him out. Now, you would say, hold on, I've seen him at news conferences, and you may have seen him at a rare corporate function. But what happens after that is that for a day or 2 days after that, he is a basket case. Because he's had to do what is called masking so rigorously to adopt a personality that shows that he can belong in that world. But for him, it's emotionally and physically exhausting. But he can turn it on and turn it off. But it takes a massive toll on him. Being in a one-on-one situation wasn't too bad. I said to him at the time, we are complete strangers, but we're going to have to know each other really well, and you're going to have to talk to me not as a journalist, but as a therapist, because I'm going to constantly be saying to you, how did you feel? But why did you do that, and how did it make you feel? And that's what we did, and he quite happily bared his soul. And I think one of the reasons was that I gave him an escape. I said to him, everything you say to me stays in this room. I'll write it all up, and then you can decide if you want to take it out or leave it in. And so we did it like that. And so when he spoke about growing up in an alcoholic household, his father was a terrible drunk who mentally abused him, never physically abused him, mentally abused him. that was the kind of stuff that I thought is going to be taken out at some stage. He left everything in. There was one story he took out, which I will tell you, because it's just mad. When he got banned for a year for criticizing the referee Nick Berry in the now infamous Erasmus video, part of his penalty was that he was not allowed to be with the Springboks on match day. And I said to him, so what was that like? He went, I was with them every day. He never adhered to that. The only thing he did was he didn't go to the stadium, but what he did was he bought what he calls, and only Russie could describe walkie-talkies as this. He just said, I bought a pair of ninja walkie-talkies. Anything that is extreme or over the top in Russie's world is ninja. So I bought these ninja walkie-talkies. And he would then go to a venue close to the stadium, and Felix Jones, the assistant coach, would have one of the other walkie-talkie, and Russie would sit in front of the TV or on his laptop, whatever it might have been. Felix would say, okay, the national anthems are starting now. Russie would run a clock and watch the national anthem start now, and he'd see the delay, 9 seconds. And he understood. And he would then, as he watched the game, he would shout instructions to Felix. Felix would send them to Jacques. Jacques would execute them, and that's what they did. But then came an occasion where they were at Twickenham, and the coach's box is outside. So Felix said to him that there's going to be a problem here, because I can't say Russie says. They're going to hear me, and they're going to go, hold on, who's on the other end of that walkie-talkie? He's not supposed to be involved on match day. So Russie says to him, okay, tell you what, call me by another name. So he goes, okay, what? He says, call me Stefan. But now, Felix can't say Stefan, he can't even say Russie, he says Razzie. Razzie, so call it Razzie, so being Irishman. So it became Stefan. He couldn't say Stefan. So Stefan became the name, which every time Russie said it, cracked him up. He laughed so hard as he's telling the stories. He's almost gasping and weeping. This whole notion of Felix going Stefan. So the game is being played, and Russie spots that Bongi's gone down, and he can spot a head injury like nobody else on Russie. And he goes, Bongi's hurt, get him off the field, tell Jacques. So Felix says, Jacques, Stefan says we must take Bongi off. Jacques looked at him and carried on watching the game, and now Russie's getting agitated because this is not happening. He tells Jacques, get Bongi off. Stefan says, Stefan's getting angry, we must get him off. Stefan's now shouting at me. He goes, who the hell is Stefan? So that story got taken out of the book. And the thing about Russie though is he tells it all the time. And I said to him, dude, people are going to hear that story. He goes, no, you can tell people. He said, but as long as you say to people that we're only joking, so I'm sure I'm only joking. What intrigued me about Russie was that how is it that a boy from Dispatch is the one who gets transformation right, when everything is going to work against him? He comes from a conservative Afrikaans blue-collar town where racism is normalized. And he gave some stories about growing up in this environment and how normalized the most awful racism was. And only now as he looks back on it, it's with a terrible sense of shame that those things happened, even though he's trying to remember, I was 12 years old and I thought it was normal. Calling somebody an elder, a black elder, dropping the K-bomb, for example, and he wanted that specifically put in the book as a moment of great shame. But also what he saw in the man's face when he used this word, the embarrassment and the humiliation. And these are things that resonate so deeply with Russie because he had this alcoholic father. In the small town of Dispatch, everybody knew Abel Erasmus was an alcoholic. Abel Erasmus was a genius musician. He worked at the Department of Bantu Administration, as it was called, and later Home Affairs, and he controlled the dormpassa, the pass laws. He would decide who got a pass and who didn't. He stamped the passes. And it upset him. He didn't like this job. He understood what it meant for the human psyche to be forced to carry this document around. And he instilled that in Russie. But for Russie, it became deeper than that. It was this alcoholic father the rest of the town looked at with a degree of pity. And he felt humiliated and embarrassed by his father. And everything he does in life now is all predicated on the avoidance of humiliation and the avoidance of embarrassment. When he was at the Cats as the captain, Laurie Mains was the coach, and the quota system had been in place. And Laurie Mains, who didn't understand being in New Zealand, didn't understand the racial dynamics of South Africa properly, or wasn't sympathetic to them. He decided that this was the worst thing, and he wasn't going to adhere to it, but he would follow the letter of the law, but not the spirit of the law. And he said to Conrad Janchis, a young coloured player, who I would reckon is easily the most prodigiously talented South African that's ever been produced, because he played international soccer, cricket and rugby at junior level. He could have chosen any one of those three sports and he would have excelled. If an ankle injury delayed his soccer practice, so he went to rugby at CBC and he became a Springbok rugby player. But he was hugely talented. But Laurie Mays judged him not on his talent, but on his skin colour. And he said to Conrad Janchis, I'll pick you in the starting team because I have to, but after 7 minutes you're going to fake an injury and come off. Dean Hall is going to take your place. And Rassie, as the captain, saw the humiliation in Conrad Janchis' eyes and the embarrassment in Dean Hall's eyes. And he said, we can't do it like this. And that's where the seed now germinated. And he decided to do, when Coach Barnes was talking now, it resonated, about the way in which you grow the youngsters. Rassie was always looking at rugby, and so were the other non-white, if I can use that expression, coaches, Alistair Coetzee and Peter de Villiers. They looked at what they had in terms of senior players and tried to make the racial mix. Rassie said, why don't we start lower down and start with the under-12s, and then did roadmaps, and I'm sure there's Coach Barnes. This will all be familiar to you, where you look and you say, what's the skill set of a 12-year-old and a 13-year-old and a 14-year-old? What should they be able to do as they progress? Can they pass left and right? How fast do they run 100 meters? If they're big kids, how strong are they? And grow them, give them the nutrition, the training programs, the education, all of that stuff, and progress them up the ranks. But his main thing is you give opportunities to people who otherwise don't get them. Then it's up to them to accept the opportunity and make it work for them. And that's the way Rassie has grown this huge pool of players, both black and white. It's called the Elite Players Development Pathway, the EPD. If ever you are stuck in a room with Rassie and you want to make small talk, he doesn't do small talk. You want to engage with him, just say to him, Russ, tell me about the EPD. He will talk to you until the cows come home, because of his deepest passion is his Elite Players Development Pathway. When I said to him, what gave you greatest pleasure? Holding that World Cup as an option. And he looked at me in absolute amazement. He said, no, John, no. I said, but we've got a photograph in the book. We were going through a lot of photographs, and there was one of him holding up, this is now 2019, holding up the Red Ellis Cup. I said, that moment, he went, no, I'm surprised that photograph even exists. He said, I held it for a split second. I didn't want to hold it. That was for the players. I said, then what gave you joy? What gave you satisfaction? He said, it was sitting and watching my EPD boys scoring tries with such ease. Lekanya Tumapimpi, Cheslin Colby. You remember those two great tries? EPD guys. That's the way they came up the ranks. And it was to see them doing the stuff that he had set in motion all those years earlier, all coming to fruition. I can take you back to his second test in charge against England, where, so the first test was against Wales in Washington, and he didn't care about that one. It was called the Moneymaker. He gave, I think, 13 players a debut, some of whom had never played a game. The first test was going to be the main one against England, and he picked Spoon Corsi and Apiwe Janchi as his wingers, and he gave them huge responsibility. And after 17 minutes, I think we were 24-3 down, and he went, oh my God, my whole world is imploding on me. And what should I do now? And it's something I do in a talk for the corporates, is that when you've made your decision, you've got to keep going with it. Because he went, you know what? The instruction to them is go harder. Because Jacques was saying we're going to have to go back to our old defensive patterns. This is not working. He says go harder, give them the confidence. And you can see that from when the instruction is given to those two wingers, go harder, that's when Spoon Corsi does a break. That's when Apiwe Janchi starts making an impact. And by halftime we were up and we won that game, one of the most historic of our victories. And it's the EPD players that were doing it. And he was derided for it. Those guys aren't ready. So, well, when are they ever going to be ready? There was always, he felt, this undercurrent of racism. It's not that they are too young, it's because they're too black. When he chose Sia as the captain, he was pilloried by his Afrikaner community, his dispatch community, and his army buddies as pandering to his political paymasters. And that's the way you can annoy Russ. You want to really get his back up? Just accuse him of playing political games. It absolutely infuriates him. It made him so angry when we were talking about it, he cried. He cried tears of anger. And let me tell you quickly how he did that. He was looking at his team and he picked the players, and his mantra is, you don't pick the best players, you pick the right players. And so he looked at his team and went, yep, that's my team. Oh, I need a captain. So who should captain? He went, oh, okay, who was the captain with Alistair Coetzee? It was Ibn Exmouth. Oh, but he's injured. Okay. Who else? Who's a senior player? Oh, Dwayne Vermeulen. Dwayne plays in France. I wanted a South African player. And then he said, I need a player who's close to the referee. So he can bite the referee some shit. So you'd be a flanker or a prop or the scrum half. And he looked at him and went, oh, hold on, Sia captain for the Stormers. He'd known Sia since Sia was 17 years old. So he nurtured it. Sia wasn't on the EPD, but he had benefited in other ways, in a similar way that the EPD benefits players. So they managed to get him out of a terrible township school and into Grey High, for example. And then the Cheetahs poached him at the age of 17, got him to sign a contract, and Rassie was able to go to them, go, dude, the 17-year-old can't sign a contract. That's another boy who got him back and signed for the Western Province Academy. And so Sia, he knew, and he was a flanker, so he's close to the referee. Sia's going to be my captain. He announced it to the squad, that Sia will captain, everybody clapped. And so the room, he then went to the president of the South African, of SA Rugby, Mark Alexander, said, there's the team for the game against England at Ellis Park. He said, and then, John, you know what, it was like a nuclear explosion had gone off in England. He said, what's going on? He said, I was petrified. Actually, I could use Russ's real language, but you know what, we're in polite company, so I won't. I mean, every second word is the F-bomb. And he then suddenly, he genuinely was amazed and surprised that this was a historic moment. And they said, you're going to be bombarded with questions about this. He said he was totally unprepared for the fallout that would happen, and then the accusations that it's a political power play. And he said, John, he's the right player. Because everybody's saying, oh, this guy's better, this guy's better. He said, that's not the reason he's in the team. It's not about the best player, it's the right player. Sia is the right player. I then thought that it did sound too naive. So I thought, let me check with Sia. And I had a chat to him about how the captaincy came about, and he told exactly the same story, but through different eyes. So it came at a different angle. And I just went, oh, it's here, captains. And he went, oh, funny Moses, I'm the captain, this is incredible. But nobody reacting with shock at all. Only later was there this great thing. So Rassie almost approaches this issue of transformation with a kind of a naivety. And it stems from the fact that he's not the most worldly of people. It comes from Dispatch, then went to Bloemfontein. And the reason he went to Munster in Ireland is because Limerick, the town where Munster is based, reminded him of Bloemfontein. That's a worldly. He says to me, John, you know, I've never, I said, surely when we've gone on tour, you've gone and explored the world. He goes, no, John, I stay in my hotel room, which only later I realized is absolutely the case, because he doesn't like socializing with people. He said to me, I said, no, Paris, come on, you must have walked around Paris. He said, John, I can tell you, I've never seen the Eiffel Tower. But when we were going through the photographs, his former PR manager, Andy Murray, sent us a whole lot of photographs, because we didn't want the standard professional shot, we wanted more fun and game shots. And there's a photograph of Rassie with a bunch of teammates, and behind them is the Eiffel Tower. I said to him, you have seen the Eiffel Tower. And he looked at that thing like he was looking at the photograph of his firstborn child. He didn't know that he had seen the Eiffel Tower, but it had no impact on him whatsoever. When he walked into my study the first time we started working, I've got all the books that I've collected over 40 years of journalism, and they lie on one wall. And he looked at this, and he looks at me with that kind of disparaging, and he goes, hey, Tom, how many of these books have you actually read? I said to him, well, I mean, this has been a 40-year collection, I've read them all. He goes, yeah, well, you're going to judge me now, because I've never read a book in my life. I went, that can't be true. Is that at school? He went, oh yes, at school I read Lord of the Flies. That's the only book he's read. Kind of appropriate, wouldn't you say? And I said, but Russ, there's a problem here because you are, because he said it's one book and that's the last book I'm going to read in any event. He said you're going to have to read one more. Which one? It's your own book. He goes, yeah, I'm not sure about that. Then once the book had come out, Russie always sends voice notes and WhatsApps. He never phones. And one day my phone rang and it's Russie. I thought, oh shit, what's going on? Are you okay? He says, no, John, I read the book. A week later he phoned me again. He says, I've read it again. I said, Russ, that's 3 books here. It's looking very good. I'll leave you with one last story with about Russie, just because it does seem so unbelievable. John and I told a music story about how they were in a team meeting. Russie's busy drawing on the board. These alignment camps they do loads of alignment camps, and where nobody touches the rugby ball, but they talk about things and issues and making sure that everybody understands where everybody else is coming from and what they're doing, and the buy-in he feels is absolutely important, which it is. But he says Russie's busy drawing, he draws diagrams all the time, he's drawing. I said, stop drawing, talk to me, I can't write a drawing. And he was drawing something, and Jacques having a diploma in business management or something like that. He's looking, he's going, that seems to be, that's from module 2, term 3. And he said, Russ, where did you read about that? He goes, John, what are you talking about? I don't read. This comes out of my head. The amazing being that is Russie Erasmus is that what gets taught at tertiary institutions is something that just springs to his mind. I could bang on and on about this guy. I try to get to the inside his head about what makes him a genius. He wouldn't entertain it at all. He said, that's Vincut, and that's another thing that is so important in his world. If you Vincut, you're out. If you're a prima donna, you're gone. If you're entitled, I don't want to know you. And that's why this crop of Springboks, you'll find the humility is something that is universal in that squad. That anybody who thinks he's a big shot, a Springbok, you're not in Russie Erasmus's team. So I could never get him to talk about him being a genius. This constant refrain. I had to go to Nick Mallet and say what makes him a genius. And it was this ability to size up where everybody was, to see patterns where other people can't see the patterns. He gave me a very nice, Russie did. He gave me a very nice expression. I said to him, he was talking about how he was never the fastest player. I said, but you were always at a situation of the breakdown very quickly. He said, yeah, but that's because I started running before everybody else. He explained that to me. He said, well, it's like a game of chess. I said, oh, I see, you're a couple of moves ahead. He goes, no, John, I'm 10 moves ahead. So it was his ability to go, there's the breakdown, and he looks at what's happening with the defense or the attack, how they're lining up. The ball's going to go there. So he starts going there, where the action is there. So when the ball eventually does go there, that poor player gets ball and man. Russie's on him immediately. So he said, I was never the fastest, but he could analyse the game better than most. And I suppose we had Nas Boerter who could do it. These days, Anton de Pont, those are players who could look up and immediately know where everybody is and what everybody's about to do. But it was Russie's ability to look at patterns and understand patterns and see patterns evolving where others don't. He says the best way to look at a rugby match is never on TV. You need a wider view. The view that he works with is a one-camera static picture that SA Rugby puts up that shows the whole field, because it's the off the ball that is as important as the on the ball action. What is happening elsewhere? That's why we have an off the ball coach in Mzwandile's stick. And by the way, just a tiny bit of trivia. When Damien Willems took the mark and called the scrum in the game against France, and everybody went, Russie, brilliant Russie. Actually, that was Mzwandile's stick. He was the one who came up with that idea. Russie was the guy who phoned Jaco Paper, the ref, and said, look, can we do this? And Jaco Paper said, hell, I'm not sure, but I'm having dinner with the other refs. I'll ask them. And then phoned back and said, yeah, you can take a scrum off a mark. Then the next day when they played France, the referee came into the dressing room to just talk to the props about the way he was going to police the scrums. And then Russie said, oh, by the way, we're going to call for a mark, scrum off a mark. Just want you to know. And the ref, I forget one of the French, I think it was Reynald, said, oh, that's interesting. We were talking about that last night. again, I've got millions more stories, but I realise what we are at 10 o'clock. Time is money for a lot of you, you working people. I will let you go. It's been an absolute pleasure being back at Penny's, and thank you very much for indulging.